I thought I was doing everything right. I worked 60 hours a week running a small civil engineering firm I had built from nothing. I came home every night, even when I was exhausted. I coached my son's little league team on Saturdays. I remembered anniversaries. I learned to cook her favorite dish, chicken piccata, because she mentioned once, years ago, that her grandmother used to make it. I thought that was what love looked like. Showing up, paying attention, being steady. I was 43 years old, and I thought I had built something real. My wife and I had been married for 11 years. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party in Austin, Texas. She was laughing at something across the room when I first saw her, and I remember thinking I wanted to be whoever made her laugh like that. We dated for 2 years before I proposed at the same park where we had our first real conversation. She said yes before I even finished the sentence. We had 2 kids, a son, 13, quiet and sharp the way his mother used to be, and a daughter, 9, who still believed the world was fundamentally good. I worked hard so they could believe that a little longer. My wife worked in pharmaceutical sales. Good money, flexible schedule, a lot of client dinners and regional conferences. I never questioned any of it. I trusted her completely. That trust was not a passive thing, it was something I had chosen, deliberately, every single day. I thought she had made the same choice. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday. I came home early because a client meeting had been canceled. It was maybe 2 in the afternoon. The house was quiet. My wife's car was in the driveway, which surprised me. She had told me that morning she had back-to-back client visits until 6. I thought maybe she had come home sick, so I didn't call out when I walked in. I didn't want to wake her if she was resting. I set my bag down in the kitchen. That's when I heard her voice from the living room, low and warm in a way that I recognized but hadn't heard in a long time. She was on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen. I was just standing there, keys still in my hand, and her words reached me before I had any chance to prepare for them. "He has no idea," she said. "He never questions anything. That's always been his problem, he just trusts." It's almost sad. I stood completely still. "I know," she said, laughing softly. "But what am I supposed to do? The kids are here. The house is here. My whole life is structured around no. I'm not saying I don't care about him. I'm saying it's complicated. You know it's complicated." There was a long pause. Then, "I'll see you Thursday. The usual place. I'll figure out an excuse." I heard the call end. I don't know how long I stood there. Long enough that my arm went numb from holding my keys in the same position. Long enough that I heard her walk to the kitchen, stop at the doorway, and say my name with a startled voice. "You're home early," she said. "Client canceled," I said. I looked at her. She looked back at me. Her expression settled quickly into something practiced, a mild smile, a question about whether I wanted coffee. I said sure. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her move around the room and tried to find any sign in her face of what I had just heard. There was nothing. She was completely calm. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't known before. She had been doing this for a while. I didn't say anything that afternoon. I needed to think. I had spent 2 decades in engineering, and the one thing that profession teaches you is that you do not make a structural decision based on incomplete data. You assess, you gather, you verify, then you act. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat in my home office and thought carefully about the last 6 months. The client dinners that ran late. The regional conference in Phoenix that I didn't question. The way she had started sleeping on her side of the bed with her phone face down on the nightstand, charger plugged in, screen always dark when I happened to glance over. Small things. Individually, they meant nothing. Together, they told a different story. I did not download any surveillance apps. I did not hire anyone. What I did was quieter than that. I started paying attention in a way I hadn't before, not with suspicion, but with accuracy. I noticed when she was evasive about scheduling. I noticed which client names she mentioned repeatedly. I noticed that on the nights she said she had regional calls, she would go upstairs to take them privately, something she had never done before. 3 weeks after the phone call I overheard, I had enough of a picture to know I wasn't imagining it. I made an appointment with a family law attorney on a Thursday morning. I told my office I had a site visit. I sat across from a woman who had handled 300 divorce cases and told her everything I knew. She was methodical and unsentimental, which I appreciated. She told me what I would need, how the process worked in Texas, and what my rights were regarding the house and custody. I listened to every word. By the time I walked out, I had a plan. I also had, for the first time since that Tuesday afternoon, a sense of solid ground under my feet. I want to be honest about those weeks, because the internet version of stories like this tends to flatten them into something cleaner than they actually are. It was not a movie. There were nights I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. There were mornings I watched my daughter eat cereal and felt something in my chest that I couldn't name. There were moments I almost said something not out of anger, but out of sheer exhaustion from carrying it alone. I didn't say anything. Not yet. The Thursday of the usual place arrived. My wife told me at breakfast that she had a lunch meeting with a new specialty pharmacy account and then a compliance training in the afternoon downtown. She said she would probably be home by 6:30. I nodded. I said okay. I kissed her on the cheek the way I always did and told her to drive safe. Then I drove in the opposite direction of my office. I want to be careful here, because one thing I've always believed is that coincidence and planning are different things. I had no tracking device. I had no way to follow her without her knowing. What I had was a name she had mentioned twice on the phone, once casually in a conversation I overheard a few days after the first one. I had done enough looking to know where that name worked, and I had a reasonable guess about geography. It turned out I was right about the geography. I was sitting in my truck in the parking lot of a Whole Foods on South Lamar, eating a sandwich I had picked up because I hadn't eaten since 6 that morning, when I saw her car pull into the lot of the wine bar across the street. She parked. She got out. She was wearing a dress I had complimented once, and then never seen again. A few minutes later, a man I didn't recognize walked across the lot and met her at the entrance. He put his hand on the small of her back as they went inside. It was a gesture so familiar it made my stomach drop, not because it was dramatic, but because it was ordinary. They looked like a couple. They looked comfortable. I sat there for a while. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. What I did was take out my phone, because I had a meeting, a real one, with a contractor about a drainage project at 2 o'clock. I drove to that meeting. I sat across from a man named Dale who talked for 45 minutes about soil permeability ratings, and I followed every word, asked the right questions, and did not think about what I had seen. I had learned, somewhere in the previous 3 weeks, how to compartmentalize in a way I hadn't known I was capable of. The process after that moved more quickly than I expected. My attorney filed quietly. My wife was served on a Wednesday morning, after the kids had left for school. I was not home when it happened. I was at my office, working on a project proposal, and my phone buzzed with a text from my attorney that said simply, "Done." I drove home that afternoon not knowing what I would find. She was sitting at the kitchen table. The papers were in front of her. When I walked in, she looked up at me with an expression I had never seen before, something between fury and what might have been, underneath it, guilt. "You knew," she said. "How long?" "Long enough," I said. This is she started, then stopped. Then, I didn't mean for this to happen. I sat down across from her, at the same table where we had eaten 11 years of breakfast together. "What did you mean for, then?" I asked. Not with anger. Genuinely. She couldn't answer that. She tried several versions of what I have since learned is a common sequence. "I wasn't happy. You were always working. You never really saw me. Things had changed between us, and I didn't know how to talk to you about it." Each sentence was technically about our marriage, but functionally it was about why I was responsible for what she had done. I listened to all of it. I didn't argue with any of it. When she was finished, I said this. "If you were unhappy, you should have told me. I would have listened. I would have gone to counseling. I would have done whatever it took. You know that. The problem isn't that you were unhappy. The problem is what you chose to do with that instead of talking to me." She started to cry. I had watched her cry many times in 11 years at movies, at our kids' school performances, when her mother had been sick. I recognized the sound. I felt something, hearing it. But I had made my decision weeks ago, and I was not going to unmake it sitting at that table. "What about the kids?" she asked. "The kids are my first priority," I said. "They always have been. I want joint custody, and I'm willing to be reasonable about everything else. But I need you to understand that however we handle this going forward, the kids are not going to be in the middle of it. I'm not going to use them, and I'm not going to let this household become a battlefield." She wiped her face. She nodded, slowly. And him? She asked. Are you going to? I don't have anything to say to him, I said. He's not my concern. As it turned out, he was not her concern much longer either. I learned this later, not from her but from something my son said, offhandedly, a few months after everything was settled. Apparently, the man had stopped returning her calls within 2 weeks of the divorce filing becoming public. My son had overheard a phone conversation he wasn't supposed to hear. I told him gently that those kinds of conversations weren't meant for us to carry, but I heard the contempt in his voice when he described it, and I recognized it. He was 13 and already knew that people who appear only when things are easy are not people you can count on. I want to talk about my son for a moment, because he surprised me. He's a quiet kid. He processes things slowly and then says something precise. About a month after his mother moved into an apartment nearby, we were sitting on the back porch after dinner, him with his phone and me with a cup of coffee. Out of nowhere, he said, "Dad, I've been watching how you've handled this." I looked over at him. "You haven't said anything bad about Mom," he said. "You haven't complained. You've just kept going." He paused. "That's what you're supposed to do, right? Keep going." I didn't know what to say to that for a moment. I told him that his mother loved him, and that what had happened between her and me was between us as adults, and that none of it was about him. He nodded like he already knew that. Then he said, "I know. I just wanted to tell you that I noticed." I had to look away for a second. 13 years old. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I sat at the kitchen table across from her. Texas is not a particularly complicated state for divorce when both parties eventually cooperate, and we cooperated. I kept the house, which we had agreed on because the kids' schools and friends were rooted here. She got a fair share of our joint accounts and a settlement that my attorney told me was reasonable given the circumstances. I did not pursue fault-based grounds even though I could have, not because I was being a martyr, but because I had done the math and decided that a longer, uglier legal process was not something my kids needed to watch their parents go through. There were things I grieved in those 7 months. Not her, exactly, or not only her, but the version of the life I had thought I was building. The version where Saturday mornings meant pancakes and Little League, where summers meant the same lake house every July, where growing old meant someone who had seen you at every age and chosen you anyway. I had genuinely believed in that version. Letting go of it was slow and, some nights, surprisingly physical, the kind of sadness that sits in your chest and makes it hard to take a full breath. I did not rush past any of that. I did not pretend it wasn't there. What I did was keep showing up. I was at every school event. I drove my daughter to her dance recital in November and sat in the front row and cheered too loudly and didn't care. I helped my son study for his history exam on the Civil War. I coached Little League in the spring. I made chicken piccata on a Sunday because my daughter asked what my favorite food to cook was, and I realized with a start that I still liked making it, not because of any association, but just because I was good at it. And it turned out that the things you are good at don't stop being yours just because the context around them changes. My daughter, one evening, asked me if I was sad. I told her that sometimes I was, yes, but that I was also okay, and that both of those things were true at the same time. She thought about that for a moment, and then said that was interesting because she had thought sad and okay were opposites. I told her they weren't always. She seemed to find that useful. The house is quieter than it used to be. Some nights I notice the quiet more than others. But it is a different kind of quiet than the kind I lived inside for those weeks before the papers were filed that silence had weight and edges. This one is just empty, which is a thing you can fill slowly, in whatever way feels right. My firm took on 2 new municipal contracts this year. I've been running again, something I stopped in my early 30s because I told myself I didn't have time, which was never really true. My son made the high school baseball team and called me from school to tell me before he called anyone else. My daughter is in a phase where she wants to learn everything about every animal that has ever existed, and our dinner conversations have become unexpectedly educational. I am not going to tell you I have it figured out. I'm 43, which is old enough to know that anyone who claims to have it figured out is either lying or not paying attention. What I will tell you is this. I spent 11 years believing that trust was something you gave completely or not at all. I think now that's not quite right. Trust is something you extend with care, the way you'd extend any load-bearing structure, knowing the weight it needs to carry, building it to spec, and paying attention when something doesn't sound right under pressure. I ignored a lot of sounds that didn't seem right. I won't make that mistake again. Last Sunday, I pulled into the driveway after dropping the kids at their mother's and sat for a moment in the car before going inside. It was one of those late afternoon October moments when the light goes golden and long and everything looks a little better than it probably is. I sat there and thought about the Tuesday afternoon 2 years ago when I walked into my house and my whole life changed in about 45 seconds. And then I thought about my son saying I noticed, and my daughter asking whether sad and okay could be the same thing, and the drainage project I was proud of, and the chicken piccata I made on Sunday afternoons now just because I wanted to. I got out of the car and went inside. The house was quiet, and I was okay.